Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on fatherhood and reentry, engaging families in the reentry process. My name is Ron Davis, and I am a Grantee Technical Assistance Manager at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The Council of State Governments Justice Center provides training and technical assistance to all grantees funded under the Federal Second Chance Act. I oversee technical assistance provided to all Second Chance Act grant programs focused on mentoring adults in reentry, mentoring young fathers in reentry, supporting children and families of incarcerated parents, and technology-based career training reentry programs. Before we begin, I have a couple of technical notes. If you encounter connection or audio problems during this webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. Again, it's 1-866-229-3239. We'll also put that number up on the chat box on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Unfortunately, there are some connection issues we may not be able to resolve during the webinar. We will be sending out the PowerPoint from today's webinar to all participants. We are recording today's webinar, and we're also recording today's webinar and will be posted on our website. Everyone who registered for the webinar will receive an email as soon as the webinar is available on our website. You may also check the website directly at csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC. At the end of today's webinar, we will have time for questions and answers from the audience. To ask a question, please enter it in the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible before we end today. To get started, I want to give a quick overview of the Justice Center. The Justice Center is a national nonprofit organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels from all branches of government. Staff provides practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. You can find our website at csgjusticecenter.org and can also follow us on Twitter at CSGJC. In addition to serving policymakers, the Justice Center provides technical assistance to all Second Chance Act grantees through the National Reentry Resource Center, which is funded through the Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance. We are constantly adding new content and resources to our website, and we send out a monthly newsletter that provides information about the latest research, funding opportunities, distance learning events, and other news about reentry. We encourage everyone who hasn't done so already to sign up for the newsletter by going to csgjusticecenter.org/subscribe. The newsletter highlights SCA grantees, provides information on new publications and resources, as well as updates recipients on the latest reentry funding opportunities, trainings, and relevant news. For today's webinar, I am joined by Erik Vecere, the Vice President of Program Support for the National Fatherhood Initiative, and Ron and Catherine Tijerina, the co-executive directors of the RIDGE Project. The RIDGE Project is a 2014 Second Chance Act Young Fathers Mentoring Grantee. Today's webinar is the first part of a series of webinars focused on fathers and reentry. Mr. Vecere and I, through our work with fatherhood programs around the country, identified three key areas that most programs found challenging. These include today's topic of engaging with families while the father is incarcerated, engaging and retaining fathers in your program after they are released, and program sustainability. Based on the need of the programs we serve, additional topics may be identified for future webinars. In addition to the upcoming webinars, I encourage you to check out the webinar we produced in November featuring Mr. Vecere and Dr. Fagan from the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network. That webinar focused on measuring the impact of reentry programs on the families of incarcerated fathers. You can find that webinar at csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC/webinars. As I mentioned before, this webinar came about because it was an issue we saw with many of the grant programs we serve. Often reentry will focus on the individual reentering and not take into account their families. Incarceration negatively impacts families and especially children, and parental incarceration has been recognized as an adverse childhood experience. There are many benefits to engaging with families while a parent is incarcerated, for both the families and the incarcerated parents. Research has suggested that simply receiving more visits could potentially help to reduce recidivism. At this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Erik Vecere of the National Fatherhood Initiative and Ron and Catherine Tijerina of the Ridge Project.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Ronin, for the introduction and for setting the stage for today's presentation. Just a quick note about National Fatherhood Initiative. We are a national nonprofit organization. We were founded back in 1994 to combat the most consequential social trend of our time around father absence in the lives of our nation's children. And our mission statement is to transform organizations and communities by equipping them to intentionally and proactively engage fathers in their children's lives. And so we like to come alongside direct service providers such as yourselves and just try to help you accomplish your objectives and your outcomes, particularly around father engagement, as effectively as possible. And our vision is for every child to grow up with an involved, responsible, and committed father. And we have what we call our 3E strategy to help us get to our mission, which is educate, equip, and engage. And we do a number of things under each of those 3 E's. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to just Ron and Kathy so that they can share just a little bit about the Ridge Project.
Thank you, Erik. This is Ron.
And I'm Kathy.
And the Ridge Project was founded through our experience of not only poverty but incarceration. And out of that, we birthed the Tyra program. And what we get to do now is to really reinvent people. We attack the culture of entitlement by way of fatherhood, healthy marriage, and workforce development. And in doing so, we're able to strengthen and really empower families to really understand the principles of what it takes to really come out of the poverty mentality or generational cycles of poverty and unemployment and really help them redefine their vision for their life and to build and to really emphasize to have a strong, healthy, permanent family.
So the Ridge Project was founded in 2000 with the mission to build a legacy of strong families, particularly focused on families that were basically deemed by society as disposable. And so primarily our work with is incarcerated fathers and reentering fathers and their families, but we also work with low-income families and other fathers and families. We're concentrated in the state of Ohio, but we have also trained other agencies and organizations across the United States in our Tyra suite of programs. And so we're privileged to be here today with you, Erik. Thanks so much.
Great. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of kind of the roadmap for today. First, we want to take a little bit of time and talk about the importance of engaging the families of incarcerated fathers. So beyond just providing the services directly to dads, why should we invest our time and energy and finances and funding, to engage the families as well? We'll talk about some of the challenges connecting with family members of incarcerated fathers. And then we'll look at implementing a family-focused approach. And as part of that, we're going to look at 5 elements within that family-focused approach lens. And they are increasing facilities' involvement around family engagement, which is critical if we want to really get any traction. Secondly, we want to look at not only an assessment for the incarcerated father, but expanding that to include a father and family assessment. And then once you get that part of the information, taking it a step further and translating that assessment into some kind of a case plan for the incarcerated father. Then we'll look at the 4th element, which is family visitation, and then conclude those elements with number 5, measuring success. As we go through the presentation today, I'm generally going to provide more of the 30,000-foot view, while Ron and Kathy will provide insight and examples from their direct service work with the Ridge Project. So that's kind of how we structured things today to try to make it as valuable and as relevant for you as we can. So as I mentioned, it is important to take a closer look at why engaging families of incarcerated fathers is so important. And there's a lot of research, in fact some new research is emerging that demonstrates that strategies targeting stronger relationships between incarcerated fathers and their families do indeed correlate with better outcomes. The literature demonstrates that families and social networks provide significant impact and support to incarcerated and reentering fathers. And families are the major provider of housing for incarcerated fathers upon release, which is usually the most critical and immediate concern that these men and fathers have when they're leaving. And so aside from employment, families are the most common source of financial support as well for men after release. We know that many incarcerated fathers use family members in order to secure a job following release, and then incarcerated fathers rely heavily on family members for their transportation needs once they are living in the community. So, clearly there are a lot of connections there and support that make this transitional time upon reentry so critical for these incarcerated fathers. In the vast majority of cases, family members, which can include the non-incarcerated parent, grandparents, or even other relatives, they will take over responsibilities for child rearing in the absence of the incarcerated parent. And family members also provide emotional support to incarcerated fathers during what is a very stressful transition in their lives. Surveys have shown that incarcerated fathers in prison and in the community cite family support as an important component to keeping them from recidivating. This is some data that we received back from the Indiana Department of Corrections, and they studied the impact of visitation across the entire state. The key finding is that inmates who have visits are less likely to return to prison, and that out of all the visitation categories, it's a visit with one's child that is correlated with the greatest reduction in recidivism, and it's closely followed by spouse. But you can look at the numbers on there. For no visits, the recidivism rate is 41% across the state. But whenever a child visits, it drops to 28.6%. So, that's a huge reduction in recidivism just based on the number of visits by these family members or by their child. Fatherhood programs essentially then are setting up men for successful visits by helping them increase the quantity and the quality of the contact that they have with their children before they're released. And so that's a critical bridge that father programs in particular can provide that help bridge this way of engaging families of incarcerated fathers pre-release, through reentry, and then post-release. Additionally, the DC-based Center for Law and Social Policy, they've stated that the desire of parents to reunite with their children is often the key motivation for helping them turn their lives around. It essentially provides these men, these fathers, with that deeper motivation to sustain the change, to make healthier choices, because now they know that there's something bigger than themselves out there, and particularly when they get a hold of that fatherhood role, that whole piece really just opens up a whole new world for them and all new motivations to lead healthier lives, because they begin to realize they do have a unique and irreplaceable role in the life of their child and their family, and once they realize that, they're not going to have as much of an issue, coming across and overcoming some of the obstacles that maybe a man might have who is not connected at that level with his family. So I think we all know that engaging the family is important, as some of those previous slides just illustrated. However, even if we want to engage them, we'd be naive not to recognize that there are some challenges in doing that. Supportive family relationships may be strained by the challenges of staying in touch with fathers during incarceration. For example, in some jurisdictions, I know family members must travel significant distances, perhaps during work or even school hours, to visit incarcerated fathers. Oftentimes, security requirements are confusing and really cumbersome to families, especially those with small children. Visits also can take place in crowded areas and in conditions not conducive to positive parent-child interaction. So, you know, you've all maybe experienced some of this in your work, where you have settings where there is no privacy, or maybe there's no physical touch allowed or hugging or anything like that. So those are some things sometimes that need to be overcome. Personal searches, waiting times, restricted visiting hours, other aspects of visitation, they all may serve as barriers to ongoing connections between fathers and their families. But another significant barrier can be even the expense of the phone calls. Family members accepting collect calls oftentimes will even have to accept higher than market rates per minute, and that's even when the incarcerated father is dialing locally rather than long distance. So the impact of these challenges can be significant, and in fact, studies have shown that 57% of fathers in state prisons were never visited by their children. So, you know, clearly there are some barriers, both, you know, probably some personal things, but also some logistical and procedural and even things related to policies that can have an impact on that. So I'd like to turn it over to Ron and Kathy again, just so that they can share a little bit about how the RICH project addresses some of these kind of challenges.
Yeah, David, Eric, those were a lot of really good barriers that we face and that are very real. And I think, you know, as we think about the work that we do with incarcerated fathers and their families, that the primary thing is to build trust. Because once we've built trust with the incarcerated father, then we get the contact information, much better contact information, to actually be able to connect with the family, the children, the mother of the children or grandmother, whoever's raising the children, and build relationship there. But dad actually acts as the conduit in order to create that trust relationship. Once we've got that trust relationship with the caregiver or with mom, then we can actually engage them in programming at the same time as we're doing programming with the incarcerated father. And so some of that programming occurs on the outside through support groups or through different types of gatherings and family activities. Some of it actually occurs inside as we bring mom into, or the caregiver into the institution to take the same programs to the Tyro suite. As dad's going through and becoming a Tyro and going through the couple or core communication and taking Tyro jobs, we want to ensure that mom has the same skill set, and so they're both progressing at the same time, because that's the way that we are most effective at really stabilizing the lives of the children. So the family programming, we have a specific department that actually focuses in on family program development. And so this department, their whole mission and vision is to connect with the families and then connect families into the institution. So identifying barriers and finding ways to overcome those barriers.
So one of the things that we really cling to is, if a father can re-enter into his family successfully, society will be a breeze. Because the first 6 months of the drama that's going to happen in his life is going to happen at home. And so important that we engage the significant mother or the mother of his children or all those who are involved in his coming home, that he comes home to a safe environment and a structured environment where we're able to help him address all the issues, along with the issues of reconnecting with his children, reconnecting with mom, because of the hurt and pain and the bitterness that possibly has been built over the years.
And in doing so, we want to create for the family basically a one phone call place, so that figure out what the rules are for the institution, but she just contacts our family department, and then, like hospice, our family department gets the information that they need and then provides that conduit back to the family.
And so by doing so with Dad, we deliver the Tyro program, which really strengthens him and understands his role as a father, as a husband, and as a provider, to understand that no matter how much skill you have, if your character does not outpace your skill, then you're going to always end up to where you started from. Eric, back to you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I mean, some great stuff in there, and I love the you know, where the transition with the family, that if you can really help that everything else just kind of, you know, it's much easier to navigate all of the other things and that if you can get through, you know, those initial 6 months and the drama there. But that sounds great. Sounds like you have some really good systems in place to engage the family. So we are going to talk about 5 elements to implement a family-focused approach now. The first thing I'm sure you've all experienced is that every facility has a different degree of openness to engaging families. You know, some families focus more on inmate and staff safety while keeping inmates from escaping. Other facilities are more rehabilitation-minded, and then you have facilities everywhere in between. So the most important thing that you can do is to find out what the facility's priorities are and communicate how your fatherhood program is going to help them achieve their goals and make their jobs easier. So particularly for those of you, and I think you all are kind of separate nonprofits or organizations kind of working in facilities. So you have like multiple layers that you guys are trying to figure out and trying to work within, and it's important to you know, to keep that in mind. And for example, one of our partners that runs our Inside Out Dad program in the Kentucky Department of Corrections, they found that disciplinary infractions were reduced by 86% after dads went through the Inside Out Dad program. And they were able to use that stat to motivate other facilities throughout the state to add the program. So even though that initially wasn't like a family outcome, if you will, or something that was shown to, you know, have a positive impact on the families themselves, they were able to use something that was important to the facilities at large in order to get that program into other locations. If budget savings are a priority, you can put a dollar amount on what your program can do to save the facility money. One program in Nebraska called Destination Dad tracked their recidivism rate, which was only 7.7%, and showed that they saved the state over $1 million and used that as a way to increase the facility's family engagement events. Another way you can help a facility increase their family engagement work is by sharing compelling research on whatever curriculum you're using. At NFI, for example, we have numerous evaluations available for free download on our website that many of our partners have used to motivate wardens and correctional officers to increase their family engagement offerings. And I know the Ridge Project, I think you guys might even be talking about that as well, some of the things that you measure and how you track things and some things that are available. We have a couple of compelling videos also that show how fatherhood programs create trust between facility staff and incarcerated fathers. In fact, one video was done by USA Today on a program in Angola that's running Inside Out Dad, and this is the country's largest maximum security prison. And the trust that was built as a result of the program gave the staff the ability to have consistent father-child in-person events. So, you know, sometimes these programs, it kind of creates a cycle that, you know, begins to build the trust between the fathers and facility staff in order to, you know, to open up the opportunity for some of these other family-focused approaches. So let's hear a little bit more about the Ridge Project and how you guys are looking at, you know, increasing facilities involvement around family engagement.
Thanks, Eric. That was powerful what you were talking about, and it is so crucial that whatever curriculum, as you were saying, that it is user-friendly. You know, some of the curriculums that we've seen out there, you know, it's a little bit lofty, but you're right, the Inside Outside Dads and along with the Tyro program, you know, they have been really shown to be effective in not only helping the fathers become successful and become ticket-free and not getting infractions, but really helping the institutions become successful. Because one thing that you have to understand as you're building a relationship with the Departments of Corrections, they are also being graded. They got people coming in and they're monitoring them to see what type of approaches and what type of modifications they're implementing in their facilities. And if you don't understand that they too have a report card, that they too have people that they have to answer to. And one of our jobs, and we teach the people that work for us and volunteers that come, that our job is not only to make that inmate or that father successful while he's incarcerated so that he can transition into society successful, but our job also is to help that institution become successful, become a place of high marks where people aren't getting hurt, where the staff is not getting injured, where the staff is finding them at a safe place. And I think a lot of times agencies or nonprofits, we forget that our role is we're serving two clients. We're serving the administration. We're serving the guards. We're serving the whole infrastructure or what it takes to really run a prison successfully, where the prison isn't on the 11 o'clock news. You know, that's our goal, is so that it's a place of where people are really becoming healed and becoming better. And that's what it means for us to become a TYRO, a place of where, even though you're incarcerated, how do you make that place that you're incarcerated somewhere safe? A TYRO is a novice, an apprentice, someone learning something new, a warrior or founding father. And it helps them to continue on this road to success, on this constant improvement plan, and they embrace what we call learning. They really embrace coming to a place where, you know what, I know what I'm fighting for, and I'm fighting for my family.
And I think it's a really good point that that we really need to be looking at what are the outcomes of the desired implementation strategies that are actually happening inside the institutions. And so one of the first places you want to go is you want to look at your state's reentry plan and see what the priorities are and what it is that each individual institution is striving towards in order to meet the state plan. And then the second place you want to look is actually in the individual institution. And you can go online, or you can actually schedule a meeting with the administrators, the wardens, whoever it is that is overseeing the programming in that institution is especially important to meet with. Because once you understand their needs, and once you are able to understand their needs, then you're able to present your program in a way that you can show that it meets their needs. We have very strong relationships with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, without which we would not be able to do the work that we do. In addition to having that strong relationship with ODRC, we have really great, strong relationships with institutions and with personnel inside each individual institution. You have to develop that point of contact, and in order to have a strong point of contact, in order to have a strong program, you have to have buy-in from them. And so exactly what you were saying, Eric, having studies and research and outcomes to be able to show them the benefit of the program and to be able to continue to track the benefit of that program creates a lot of buy-in. And so as we've had research done on TYRO and we've been able to show that it's evidence-informed and evidence-based, then the institution leans in more and says, okay, it also meets one of our priorities and one of our needs, which is family engagement and family strengthening. Let's see now how it works. And so those things are key in implementing a family-focused approach in gaining institutional trust in facilities. And
once you gain that trust with the institution, then you really, when you find that champion, that person, that unit manager, that caseworker that is working their 40 hours a week plus and they're really excited about helping these families stay connected, and you can help empower that champion who's in there, because you know they have ambitions and they have goals too. You know, there might be a unit manager that you're working with, and you may not know this, but they want to get promoted. They might one day want to become awarded. And if you can find out what their ambitions and goals and dreams are, it's our job to help them achieve that. Not only is it our job to help the inmate, the father or the person who goes through your program, in our case it's TYRO, become the best man that he can be, or a man worth following, that it's our job to also find out what are the dreams and ambitions of your caseworkers, the people that you're counting on to help you get in this prison, help you set up the classes, help you climb over the barriers or the infrastructure and all the rules and regulations that are in that system. It's our job to help them also reach their dreams and goals. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Some great things to consider, you know, when you're trying to engage these facilities around a more family-focused approach. And as I mentioned, because they can be anywhere on the continuum, but finding those things out that Ron and Kathy just shared, I think are critical things to look at. So the second element in implementing a family-focused approach is to look at your incarcerated father and family assessment. When fathers enter an institution, the assessment process should not only provide an opportunity for the agency to collect information on his risk and his criminogenic needs, but more comprehensive information about their families as well. And these can include assessment domains about family, what kind of pro-social supports that he has access to, and the father's strengths can all help to develop an understanding of his family life. And things like the extent of likely parental support and identification of pro-social companions or healthy relationships can really help to get a clearer picture of what's really going on in his life and what kind of things can be leveraged in order to more effectively engage the family there. You may also want to engage offenders through open-ended questioning techniques so that you can get more detailed information about their family life, because I know I've seen a number of assessments, and some of them are very much almost like check a box, and you have a lot of, yes or no's or NA's or things like that. But you may want to look at, as an example, how would you describe the relationship with the mother of your children as more of an open-ended question, so that, he'll provide what he wants to provide, but you'll get a lot more and a lot richer data that you can work with in order to do that. So Ron and Kathy, if you wanted to just share a little bit about how you have been assessing the families as well as the fathers and how you integrate that together would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So as we work with the families, we work with Dad. He does an intake form, and also in the application, we gather a lot of information through the application. Then once they're actually admitted into the program, they have an intake form where we get a lot of information, pro-social and family and employment, and also juvenile or adult history, and also their finances. And then as we gather that information, then as we go through the program and we connect with the family, we gather the same information from the family members, because we really need to understand what their needs are. In order to really reconnect the family, if they're really looking at, let's say, a homelessness or that they don't have money for food, it's hard for them to care too much about really reuniting Dad with the kids. And so it's really important that as you assess and gather their needs, that you also have a really strong network to connect to so that you can meet their needs. We have a system called Tyro 365, and it's a comprehensive mobile digital system that really enables these very fragile families to have access to intensive case management 24/7. So they can log on to this system, be part of this system, have their own space there, have engaging content, but also we collect data and analytics and collect information on them so that we know how to best serve them. So back to you, Eric.
And that leads right into our third element on case planning, because implementing a father-focused approach is a family-focused approach also has to all come back and focus on who you have, which is the dad who you're directly working with pre-release and during that reentry process. So once that assessment is complete, it's critical that information about offenders' families support that all of that information feeds into the development of the case plans. The assessment provides a snapshot of the father's life, but how do you translate it into next steps in the most effective combination of interventions that you may or even may not have at your fingertip at that time? One way is to ensure that offenders' risk level guides the level and type of supervision and programming, as well as the extent of efforts to engage the family members. So an example might be to target efforts at engaging families for those fathers identified as medium to high risk, so that the valuable time and resources are used where they have the greatest impact on recidivism. Consider information about fathers' family strengths in the development of the case plan, and then determine how family support can address those criminogenic needs. such as unhealthy associations that he may have that may be showing up on the radar through the assessment. There may be family conflict that is brought to light during that assessment process. And there may even be, some antisocial values that may help you identify where the father can get the most relevant and valuable support services to move him, along a healthier growth trajectory as a result of that. Since there will be critical issues unique to different dads, you will also want to be aware of all of the support services available in the facility and also in your community outside the facility, and of course combining that with whatever services that you and your organization provide as well. And of course that will allow you to address each dad from a holistic approach by integrating additional support that is relevant to his unique situation. So I also want to keep that in mind as well, that there are some universal issues and critical issues that these men face, but then, depending on where they are in that particular time, there may be a lot of unique things that kind of go into the mix that you need to take a look at. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ron and Kathy.
All right, thank you, Eric. And this is crucial to their success once they leave that institution. Because remember, when a man is incarcerated, everything is already planned out for him. From the time he wakes up, from the time he lays down that day, it's pretty well set in what he's going to do, what he's going to eat, when he's going to shower, and what's available to him while he's there every day. And so what's really exciting about what we get to do is we get to really help formulate a vision and a mission for the father and their families. We get to help them learn how to dream again. And it's really important to get them to understand what it means to have a goal that's obtainable. So what we do is we have what is called the Goal Achievement Plan. And we take them through a series of questions and they answer them and really make it applicable for them that these goals are obtainable, from being short-time goals to being a long-term goal. And
so in that goal achievement plan, as we talked about earlier, we really address all areas of their lives. And then we also engage the families in that. Then the facilitator then can utilize all that information in order to really create a specific plan or a prescription for that father that addresses his specific needs and his family's specific needs. And so the father becomes actually engaged in helping to meet the needs of the family, which is really big, because as dad transitions back home, if he begins to accept some responsibility in the planning and the actual the accountability part of it for his family, then as he comes home, he's actually part of whatever success or whatever the achievements are that his family's gotten to experience, even in his absence.
So one of the things that they really get to understand is, as a tyro, when they become a tyro, they understand that once they were the poison that was spewing, everywhere they went, they spewed poison wherever they went. But now we teach them with their dreaming and their goal setting that now they're becoming part of the antidote. The equation that they fit in is now they're no longer the poison, but they're part of the cure, part of the solution to something that they created, whether they were conscious of it or not. But now they can be conscious and bring the antidote to the dysfunction in their family, which is really exciting. And the facilitators are empowered to help them identify the agencies and the people that are in the community willing and waiting for them to help them achieve success. And we tell the men, the fathers that we work with, there is no such thing as a self-made man. You got to have a plan. You got to have a plan that's going to get you from point A to point Z, because without a plan, you're planning to fail. And we really encourage these guys to let's see what you see. Write down your vision on paper, and let's see if this is something that's attainable or something that is fantasy. And so we really enjoy seeing the men come alive and to create a better world for themselves. Thanks, Eric.
Element 4 is focused on family visitation. And here, allowing family visitation in prison is critical to maintaining family ties while fathers are incarcerated. Correctional facility staff might assist fathers in maintaining contact with their families in different ways. One way is to develop an agency policy that recognizes and supports a family-focused approach. And again, you don't always have direct say in what the policy is for that facility, but you can have an influence on it if there are policies in place that are restrictive, or some of those may be in place for good reason. But again, if you have a program, a fatherhood program, or a program that's helping him to be a more nurturing man, to be more empathic, to see through the eyes of other people, you can then begin to help the facilities see that we're building trust on both sides. So you may have more of an influence on the agency or the facility's policies than sometimes you may realize with that. But they can build visitation into the incarcerated father's regular routine. On a side note, a lot of the best practice reports that I've read encourages facilities to refrain from using contact with families as leverage or even as consequences for misconduct. However, I do talk to a lot of people in the field, a lot of wardens, correctional officers, and I know of at least a few facilities that are very clear that if these fathers have one disciplinary infraction, that they do lose that privilege. And they've stated that since that policy was instituted, that there hasn't been one disciplinary infraction, so it really hasn't been an issue either way. But that's something you really want to give a lot of reflection and some time to, and I don't know if that's something either Ron or Kathy that you guys might share a little bit on your perspective during your section on this or not, but that's been my experience. What I've read versus what I hear in the field sometimes are a little bit different, but being situational there, I think, is really advisable. Facilities can employ staff in the reception and visitation areas based on their skills in interacting with families. I mean, that's something else that they can do, kind of building it into their interviewing processes and their hiring and onboarding to make sure that the staff is really equipped and have those skills in order to interact with families. They can offer visitation hours outside of regular working hours to facilitate family schedules. That's a possibility. They can allow and encourage fathers to visit with their children as frequently as possible. And then creating a visiting environment that's welcoming to children and families is also important. And again, I know sometimes people on both sides of that, making it look too welcome is something that, that sometimes people have issues with, but most, again, the best practices and what I've heard in the field is that they have been able to create environments that are at least more comfortable for the children and the families. Sending information to families with the most up-to-date visitation policies and procedures can also really help encourage the families to visit, help them, stay in the loop and not be surprised to have a bad experience when they show up and find something's changed unexpectedly or what have you. Facilities can maintain a staffed hotline or even a call center for families who have questions about the visitation process or about family events that may be coming up. One of the other things I've heard too is that case managers can be present to meet families during visitation and answer their questions directly there, at that point, and help reduce some of the anxiety or fear that some of the family members may have. And facilities can also provide incentives for families to stay engaged in the father's lives. So again, these are just things for hopefully that you'll take a look at and kind of compare the facilities that you're working in or planning to work in, and to see if there are some things that as you get moving that you might be able to help improve or reduce some of these barriers or challenges. So let me turn it over to you guys again, and you can share some things around your family visitation.
Yeah, thanks, Erik. Family visitation is so extremely important. We have found that the more contact that dad has with his kids while he's still behind the gates, the easier the transition is back into their lives on the other side of the gates, and also, for both the kids and for dad. And also, the more engaged and involved he is, and the more likely he is to go home to stay, the more likely he is to get a good job. So we take family activities very, very seriously. Not only do we highly encourage mom, dad to have engage in the prison visits, but we also create additional time for them to really connect. Time with dad, and the time with dad events, really we give them all kinds of different activities. Visit our monthly Insight Each Institution that might
station. They're encouraged to play with one another, and so the setting is set up where dad can really let his hair down and be a little bit than a typical visit where you only, in the beginning of a visit, you can't touch your children, you can't hold them very long. There's a lot of rules and restrictions on. But during these times, time with dad.
Okay, it sounds like we're not able to hear Ron and Kathy on that. So maybe if they come back in, they can kind of finish up their section on this. Yes, yeah. You just kind of dropped out there for a couple of minutes. So, but I think you're back. So you might want to just back up a few statements.
Yeah, we were just talking about how important it is for not only having a conventional visit, if you're able to, with your institution, with dad, a family-based, where the families can really be engaged, they can let their hair down, they can relax, like they're bonding, because that is so crucial. If, on a regular visit, what happens is that when a father comes out, kids are there, it takes about an hour. The visit might only last 3 hours, but it will take about an hour before they can both finally let their mask down and come to a place of relaxation.
And I think another really key thing about having family event time, family time, and family engagement time from the actual traditional prison visit is that we actually have family programming staff that's there. And so just as you talked about, Erik, having a case manager, somebody that can kind of also get side dates with the family, which is they're really synchronized. And so our family program managers actually get to work with them, be in the parking lot with them, answer any questions, to offer them solace and additional resources to really help the family at a time. So back to you, Erik. Sorry about the glitch.
Sure, not a problem. So how do we measure success when implementing a family-focused approach? This is our final element before we open up the opportunity for you all to ask some questions. But I've already referenced many of these measurements previously, but an important pre-release metric for facilities, not necessarily outcomes related to families, but an important pre-release metric for facilities is whether it's reducing disciplinary infractions. And we talked about the reduction in recidivism earlier as well. But fatherhood programs can provide the opportunity to gather quantitative data because you can use pre and post or post-reflective assessments to show movement gain around fathering skills, attitudes, behavioral management, relationships with the mom of the child, with the children, so that directly does relate to family outcomes. But also on the qualitative side, getting stories of impact from dads and their families and doing longitudinal follow-ups is a great way to measure success. At NFI on our website, we actually have a library of videos of dads and their families who have been impacted by the programs, and we make those available on our website as a way to measure success as well. And sometimes you really want to see the faces behind the statistics, right? and know that there are families behind the data and the research, that there are actual lives being touched and transformed as a result. And so I'm going to turn it back over to you guys just to share how you measure success and some of the different things that you look at, and ultimately how you get at measuring success with with the families that you are you're reaching out to and intervening with.
Okay, thanks, Eric. We track infraction rates, we track recidivism rate, but we also track through pre and post and follow-up surveys really how Dad is doing in his relationship or spouse, and also with his kids. And I love what you said. Nothing tells a story really like the person whose life was actually impacted. We also do quantitative follow-up so that we have these real-life testimonials. So numbers really tell the story, but it's heartbreaking, like listening to somebody who. So we do that on video. You can also go to our website, thebridgeproject.com, and see videos from some of our clients. We also patients and have them go back into the institutions with us so they can, in real life, tell the story. The tyros, in comparison to the general population, are 6% less likely to have than non-tyros. Now, the before and after is a higher percentage. Half as likely to have reduced recidivism. That means that we're 3 years, which is really awesome because Ohio has dollar recidivism rates compared to the national stats. So to really see the tyros even have a here's what because our mission because we're really focused on stabilizing fragile families. 7% of Tyro Dad participants reported a strong to very strong commitment to fatherhood and their process. That's huge. We're really excited. 97.5% of couples communication participants improved in at least one category. And so that really shows that the families are becoming strong. In addition, once our tyros get out and get jobs, then they're much more likely to keep jobs. We have a 90-day job retention rate of almost 80%. And then the average wage ranges from $2. The actual average rate is $14 an hour. Jobs, they're going home, focused on their families, and connected to their families, and they're not coming back to prison. And so all of those are really important reasons. And family reintegration and stabilizing dads so they're incarcerated. And we're just really excited about the work that NFI does, Inside Out Dads, really excited about the work that we're doing with Tyro Dads, and really seeing to make a difference. Back to you, Eric.
All right, great. Thank you for that, and really for putting meat on the bones that I kind of framed out in the presentation. You guys really enriched and provided some very specific examples of some of the broader perspectives of what I was kind of laying out as well from a broader perspective. So I'm going to turn it back over, I think, to Ronin now to field any questions that you all may have. So Ronin, did you want to take over from here?
Yes, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Ron and Kathy, for just providing this wonderful perspective on this issue, both from that broad kind of macro level view that NFI is able to present and the view from a program on the ground. Just a slight technical issue, we were having some difficulty hearing Ron and Kathy. They were cutting out a little bit. So Ron and Kathy, I'll just ask that if you try perhaps calling back in, and that might address the issue, because I definitely have some questions here for you, and I want to make sure that we're able to get those answers from you. But then while they're doing that, we can address some of the questions that have come up for Erik and just about the presentation more broadly. So just a reminder to everyone, if you do have questions regarding the content of today's webinar, you can put those in the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and I'll make sure to relay those questions on to the panelists so they can answer them on the webinar today. So to get started, we've had some questions that did come in. One thing I wanted to ask, I think Erik first, and then the Ridge Project partners too. How do you work through resistance from facility staff and administrators? So there's a lot of good advice about how to get into, when you're in the facility, what kind of work to do, and partnering with facility staff and wardens and correctional officers. But in your experience, starting with Erik, with the programs that you've seen, have you seen any successful strategies for getting through to facilities that have had difficulty?
I mean, I mentioned a few of those things in the presentation. I know that, it is oftentimes getting to the right people with the right information that is going to be meaningful for them. And some of that takes some homework. Sometimes it takes maybe not necessarily getting to that person right away, but finding somebody who can be a bridge that can get you in and make sure that the timing is also good for when you're presenting whatever it is that you're presenting. But, we provide different kinds of tools, like even on the CD-ROM for practitioners who are looking to get into facilities, where we've put together what we call, it's like a practitioner PowerPoint essentially, but it assembles like all of the main, I would say, positive attributes or things that the impact of the program that we, that we've gathered over the years from different organizations across the country. And it includes, quantitative and qualitative data. It includes, some videos if you're able to actually, use a PowerPoint or have a computer or a laptop or something in there when you're showing it to those individuals, so that they can actually see things as a proxy, what's been happening in other, other facilities, other locations. I've also had interestingly, some situations where we've highlighted different facilities who are doing great things around father and family engagement within the facilities, and we'll send those things out to everybody on our list, through our social media platforms. And we've had situations where wardens and correctional officers and other staff have reached out to us directly and said, hey, I read this article, I've seen, some of these other good things going on in these other facilities. What's our next steps? So, sometimes it can be just raising awareness in ways that, maybe through some of your networks or through some of your communication vehicles that you have, that you can, you can reach people with stuff and just stay in communication. You just never know when somebody is going to, read something or learn about some work that you're doing, or maybe that somebody else has done in a different community and now they're open to it. But there's no magic bullet. That I do know. It's always, it comes down to relationships and building that trust, I think that Kathy mentioned earlier. And how you do that, it depends on your unique situation. So, but that's something that if somebody has, a specific situation, or there's something, within your community or the facility that you're trying to break into that you're having issues with, I would be more than happy to speak with you offline and really go into more detail so that I can learn more about, what your unique challenges are. And maybe we can, we can unpack that together a little bit and strategize.
Thank you, Erik. I know that with that particular issue, it's often very much based on the facility, the department, the jurisdiction, kind of each state and each jurisdiction has their own dynamic and relationship. So it definitely can come down to the specific level. Okay, so looking at the next questions, I see that Ron and Kathy have called back in, so let's go ahead and check in with them to see if they have anything they wanted to add to that question before we move on. Ron or Kathy, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think Eric, you made really great points, and I think really that word of mouth is probably the best advertisement after you have, your studies and you actually have some experience. And so really finding a program that has experience and has studies and has the evidence behind it will really go a long way. So we would really encourage you to not reinvent the wheel, but find something out there that's already working so that it's a lot easier to gain the trust and entrance into the facilities. That would be the only thing I would add.
Awesome, thank you. And that actually moves us to, is a good segue into the next question. So, someone had asked earlier if Tyro was on the National Registry of Evidence-Based Practices that SAMHSA manages, and I know that there's only 2 curricula on there that address fatherhood. One is the National Fatherhood Initiative Inside Out Dad, and there's another one that's I think a broader-based curriculum we're used on fathers, but I think it's more parent-based, mothers and fathers. But I did want to ask Ron and Kathy if you could tell us a little bit about what efforts you've made to have Tyro be evidence-based. Have there been studies done on it, and in particular around how its impact on the family as a whole, as opposed to just the father?
Yeah, thanks, Bernie. Actually, yeah, we've had a ton of research done. The research that we have had done is really around the outcomes for fathers, recidivism, family engagement, family connectivity, and also how the families are doing, or how the families are impacted by our program. And so we've had research conducted by RTI, ASPE, Urban Institute. They're part of a program with Urban Institute right now. And then also, who else? We're doing an FRPN study right now, which is Fatherhood Researcher Practitioner Network, which is actually has a control group, because we have not done either a quasi-experimental or an actual control group. And so we have a randomized control study going on right now, and so we are on our way to actually making it to the registry, and we just have not, to this point, we've really struggled with wanting to do a randomized control group, because the population we work with are so dependent, and it really is, we have many fathers that just don't want to end up in that control group because they're so desperate, and their family is breaking down so quickly that they feel like waiting a year for services would be the difference between their family making it and not making it. So we actually did, over the course of the last year and a half, implement this randomized control study, and so we can look for those results to come out in late 16. And then we will be applying to be on the NRP, on the NREP. And so I know that we are listed on other sites, and so you can actually email us, and we can send you actual copies of our research studies and briefs, and then also tell you where it is that we are registered, and let you know as we become on the NREP.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think it's great the more efforts that are put out there to research these programs. It's always difficult to do randomized controlled trials with these kinds of programs, but the more efforts that are put out there, the more resources that these programs will have, which I think will be very beneficial for the field in general. The next question, we'll start with Erik, but I think it'll be good to hear from Ron and Kathy about how they do it as well. When you were talking about an assessment that really addresses the family of the father and what their familial needs are, were they a primary caretaker, were they a non-custodial parent, how many children do they have, all of those factors that are really important to know when working with a parent. The question was, is it usually the institution or the nonprofit agency that's administering the assessment? And then I know just from my experience with grantees, it kind of depends on the relationship, and oftentimes you might have an institution that only will do a criminogenic risk assessment, so it falls on the agency to do additional assessments. But I wanted to get, Erik, your take on what you've seen in the field as to what's been working, and then we could pass it to Ron and Kathy to hear how they go about that.
Yeah, that's actually been my experiences too, Ronin, in that there's diversity out there. But oftentimes what I find is that it's usually a blend. Like as an example, with Inside Out Dad, we have our pre and post assessment tools that were designed and calibrated specifically for that program. And there are a couple of different sections to it. One section is more demographic information, and it kind of gets at some of those things that you just mentioned in terms of relationships and things like that. Not a lot of detail, but there are some, kind of more demographic things related to that, and education and, employment prior to incarceration and stuff like that. So in those cases, what we normally advise the organizations to do is to make sure that they're not, duplicating information that's already being captured in other ways by the facility, and that maybe they already have access to through the facility and through their partnership. The other piece of it is that you don't always have access to everything just because the facility is gathering that information. Sometimes they're not able to provide it to the organization as well, but there are some situations where they allow them to to get pre-approved to kind of do their own assessment to get at those pieces of information that they can't get to otherwise. Now, there's also, like, with a lot of the federal grants now, I know that there's a big push on the, their own evaluation and their own assessment, and many of them right now I know are waiting for them to kind of get that federal system up in place to actually even capture the information that the federal government wants. And so, so sometimes, like if you are a federally funded project, there will be some things that the government will actually already put in place or require to use a certain system. And I know a number of programs. I just did a training out in Logan, Utah last week, and that was their challenge, in that they were only allowed to use that instrument, and there were things that they wanted to gather information on the Inside Out Dad program that they weren't actually allowed to use. So they were asking me for advice, and I said, well, maybe you could approach the facility themselves and ask them, if they're already tracking recidivism and they're already tracking some of these other things, maybe around disciplinary infractions and other family outcome measurements, could they just also, keep a subgroup of who's going through that fatherhood program and compare, as a correlation between those two things. So there's a lot of, kind of unique and different things going on. There isn't a consistent or a standard practice when it comes to that, but there are a lot of different options. And again, it just comes down to knowing what the regulations are, procedures, policies, what they're already capturing, what you feel you need to capture, either for your funders or in addition to your funders, what you'd also like to start to track longitudinally for yourself. Then you always want to do that in conjunction, of course, with the facility and let them know what you're trying to do and what you plan to do, and make sure it's not going to interfere with any of their policies.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. So Ron and Kathy, just your take on this from just your own program, these assessments on family need, is that something that the facilities have been able to help out with, or has this been more on your end?
Well, you know what, and that's a great way to put it, a blend. It's been on both parts, and really understanding how the system in there works. Like, for example, when we want to go do a case study on there, we have to have what is called IRB approval, or the Internal Review Board is what that stands for. And so we want to make sure that if you're an agency that you want to go in there and you want to start evaluating or getting outcomes, that you can show success in your programs, you got to have a relationship with that department in corrections that is doing that, because these are the research people, and and research people, they're a different type of people. They're really analytical, and so you want to have a strong relationship with them and with the partner that you're bringing into research. So one of the things that we do is once we find the research company or the agency that is going to do the evaluation of our work, and we connect with IRB, we actually hand off that relationship to them at times so that we're not bottlenecking anything, because they're in there and they're going to take in the laptops, they're going to do the assessments, they're going to do the questions, you know, the 3-hour questions sometimes, and we want to make sure that we can navigate that relationship to where we're not becoming the stringent or stopping progress.
So typically, we are really the ones that are doing the evaluation for the family needs and the family assessment, and then the corrections are doing more the risk needs assessment for the incarcerated individual. And so it very much is a blend, and make sure that you are following whatever processes that need to be followed. Thanks, Roneen.
Thank you. So I just want a quick note going back to the evidence-based practices. So someone on the line corrected me on the number of curricula that are out there. So the one I was talking about, in addition to Inside Out Dad, was a program called Creating Lasting Family Connections, and they had a fatherhood program, and they also had a program for the family unit. So they had a number of programs where they were applying this curriculum. But there is another one that one of the attendees just brought to my attention called Parenting Inside Out. It's also a program for both mothers and fathers, but the majority of the individuals who have gone through that program are fathers. So just when thinking about different evidence-based practices that are out there, there are those 3 that are currently listed on the National Registry of Evidence-Based Practices, and then as Ron and Kathy pointed out, they're working to have theirs be evaluated, and I know there are a number of other programs out there that have been evaluated but aren't necessarily registered because the requirements for getting on that registry are stringent, and various agencies are working towards that. So, so thank you for the additional information on that. The next question that we had here, just pull it up. At what point in the father's incarceration does the intervention start? So I know that this is also very different for different organizations and different programs around the country. If, again, we'll start with Erik, if you could talk a little bit about where you've seen some successes in that area, and then we can also hear from Ron and Kathy about where they begin their interventions in their program.
Sure. Well, a lot of it has to do with the length of the sentence or the the stay of the incarcerated dad. For us, most of the time they will do it within a couple of months of release. And so in shorter stay, like jail settings and things like that, oftentimes they will do it very close to release, and in even in state facilities as well, they will usually do it pretty close to the time when the father's being released. And they do that because we have in Inside Out Dad, we have 12 core sessions, and then we have 4 optional reentry sessions that actually are specifically for that transition time as they are being released. So oftentimes they will use those 4 optional reentry sessions during the time and kind of stay connected and at least give the dad another month or so on post-release or during the transition time, depending on what that looks like. Now in maximum security prisons like Angola, the one that I mentioned earlier, they will just honestly will do ongoing cycles of the group, and there are a lot of the state-run facilities do that. Well, sometimes they'll be running 3 or 4 Inside Out Dad programs at the same time, and they'll be starting and stopping at different times, but they always have groups overlapping. So there's in many facilities, it's an ongoing offering that dads can go into. And I should mention too that most facilities pre-release with our programs do normally run a closed enrollment where fathers start on session 1 and then go through 12 before another dad comes in. They don't normally do open enrollment where dads come in on any session and flow through. We see that a lot more on our community-based program, our 24/7 Dad, but pre-release it seems like they do more more of the closed enrollment. But anyway, that's usually the timing involved from what we've seen with our program.
Okay, this is Ron. And I tell you, that's a really great question. How we begin, as soon as they get off the bus, we actually have been given the privilege of one of the reception centers. This is where a man will receive his inmate number, and really the ordeal begins. And we're there. We have what we call Tyro coaches, men who are doing a lengthy stay, who we have trained and empowered to deliver Tyro, and they're there greeting them, holding their hand. They're saying, listen, we're here to help you navigate, to understand the world you're about ready to enter. And one of the things we want to offer you is to become a Tyro. And so they're able to begin the Tyro programming, because in a reception center, they may be there 30 days, they may be up to 60, even 6 months. But most of the time, they're there like 45 days, so they ship them out from the reception center to their parent institution. And so what we have is other Tyro coaches that we're developing now, also waiting for them at their parent institution, where they're actually delivering Tyro to the peer-to-peer training, which is really exciting.
In addition to that, we really also look at 2 other populations. So we've got those that are entering, then we have general population, because teaching fatherhood and reconnecting dads to their kids shouldn't just happen at the tail end of someone's sentence. Because if we want to have the best outcomes for kids and really stabilize their lives, that needs to happen as soon as possible. And I know funding sometimes is a big issue, because a lot of the funding is really focused on that last year of incarceration, or sometimes that last remaining 6 to 9 months. And so we really have a 3-pronged approach in Ohio through the Tyro program. One is the reentry population, that's 6 to 9 months pre-release, and really focusing heavily on the Tyro suite of programs. The other one is the general population, so we can really help stabilize families early on. And then we have the Tyro coaches that really meet them as they get off the bus. And so really, I think it's very a wide variety depending upon the institutions and the funding sources.
Thank you both very much for that. We got another question regarding kind of dealing more with the assessment piece again. The question is, how is the connection made between the information collected on the father and the information collected on the family? And this might be more along the lines of if that information is collected separately, where you're assessing the father inside and then you do a separate assessment on the family, how are those connected? However, to the person who asked the question, if there's anything else on that you're specifically looking for, just let me know, and I'll make sure to pass that on to the panelists as well. But we'll go ahead and start with Erik, if you could address that, how the connection is made between those, the assessment on father and family.
I think I'll actually defer that one over to Ron and Kathy, because I don't have any specific examples off the top of my head that I can think of, where we've heard specifically back on that. So I'm going to kind of defer that one at this point.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. All right, this is Kathy. How we connect that is we have a system in place called Tyro 365. And so as we gather the information from Dad, it actually creates a space within the database for his family. So he tells us, the children or the mothers that are actually connected to him and his family. And so then as we reach out to them, then they actually have an invitation code to go in, and then we can answer those questions. I mean, we can do it in a phone call, or they can go online, or they can go on their phone, because it's a complete mobile digital enhanced system. And so then as they go on to this space, now they are connected virtually in our database to the dad and the mom and the kids, and we can actually see activity and see what happens. Case notes are all entered in under that same dad's record, and so anything that mom or the kids participate in, all of that is all under that single record. Am I answering the question, Rooney?
I think so. I think that answered my interpretation of it, but let me know if anyone has you want to elaborate on that at all. Feel free to put that in the chat box, and I can make sure to relay that on to Ron and Kathy. All right. Additional questions. I'm just double checking here. So one question that came up was around jails. So a lot of times we get grantees who are actually serving a population that's in a jail and not in a prison, and I know that that presents a whole other set of challenges, including sometimes some stricter security and less capacity to support visitation. I feel like this might be more of a question for you, Erik. I know that the Ridge Project works mostly in prisons, but you know, Ron and Kathy, if you have any insight on this, this would be appreciated as well. Have you seen any of this work around kind of improving or increasing family engagement when working with a jail population?
Well, this is Ron.
You go ahead, Ron.
Okay.
Well,
we do work.
I was.
Awesome.
Ron, did you say you do work with some jails?
We do work in county jails. We also work in treatment facility centers, which is a place that these guys get to do about a year, maybe a year and a half. And this really, so we do the same thing we do in prisons. In the treatment facility centers, we get to do the family days, time with dads. County jail is a different beast. You know, we're working in there. You only get a certain amount of window and opportunity to work with these men while they're in the county jail. And they're doing family engagements. The visitings are really restricted in the county jails versus being in a treatment facility center, which is a step down from prison. And sometimes the county jails are more like a maximum security facility, to where all the privileges that you might have in a penitentiary, you don't get in a county jail. Have you experienced that, Erik?
Yeah. I mean, that's been consistent from what I've seen as well. And in fact, the training that I mentioned that I just did a week ago in Logan, Utah, that's a statewide project, and they are working exclusively in the county jails throughout the state, like in many of the counties throughout the state. And that's what I had heard from them as well, that those restrictions can really have an impact on the options that they have to engage families in a broader sense. But they still, some of them, again, it's like there's a continuum. Some are more open than others, and there are some that do, similar kind of events and similar kind of visitation policies. But for the most part, yeah, I would say that what I've seen is kind of what Ron has described. And but one thing that we've also done too, like with our program, is that we have created a free downloadable guide on how to implement our Inside Out Dad program in shorter stay facilities. And so we have a lot of partners that kind of go on and they use that as a starting point, and then maybe tweak some things along the way. But that refers probably more specifically about how to if they need to get something from 12 hours down to 8 hours, or if they need to eliminate sessions or things like that. It's not necessarily as focused on some of the broader family engagement pieces, but yeah, that's pretty consistent with what I've seen.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I do know that a lot of the curricula that's out there is, I think a lot of effort has been made to make the curricula flexible, because different programs have different time constraints, different populations might be released at different, at different times. And so I've heard of various ones where you can kind of adjust as needed. I think there's still definitely this challenge, as Ron pointed out. There's a whole other set of challenges when working in county jails, especially when trying to bring family into the mix, whether that's as a visitation or just even communication. So, all right, so we are actually coming up on the end of the webinar here. If you do have any additional questions, feel free to put those in the chat boxes and we can try to address those offline. Thank you so much to Erik Vecere and Ron and Kathy Tijerina for presenting. And thank you everyone who joined us today and submitted questions and provided additional information to support this work. We will be emailing a link to the recording of this presentation, as well as a link to a PDF of the PowerPoint slides used in the presentation in the coming weeks. These links will also be made available on the National Reentry Resource Center's website, which you can find at csgjusticecenter.org/ /NRRC. And I encourage you, again, to sign up for our newsletter so you'll get continued updates on information from the field. The slide that's up on the screen right now does provide information for the panelists today, as well as myself. You feel free to reach out to us after the webinar is concluded if you do have any additional questions. Thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.